Hello friends, my name is Marines, and today I'll be taking you around my shelves a little bit. I've done one other video like this. I basically got the idea from other people on BookTube who have done things like picking random numbers and then choosing the book that corresponds to that number from their shelves. Instead of just pulling the book and telling you about it, I decided that it would be a way for me to kind of take you guys around my shelves that you don't get to see the full ones of them, and I don't think I'm ever going to do a bookshelf tour, to be honest, but also a good way to take stock of what I have and haven't read on my shelf. Of the 10 books that were chosen for me randomly, I had read 8 and had 2 unread. So let's go through them. Readers will always insist on adventures, and though you can have grief without adventures, you cannot have adventures without grief. The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne and Valente. I recently reread this, not because of this project, but because I was doing the magical readathon and you needed to pick a story with a red cover, and I wanted to pick something that was short and familiar to help kind of speed along the readathon or break up other reads. So I went with this. I've kind of accidentally been rereading it once a year or so. So I guess this was 2019's reread. This is a middle grade fantasy series about a girl named September who leaves behind her home and her world where her father is fighting an unnamed war and her mother has had to go to work. September is taken to Fairyland, and there she makes new friends and she goes to magical places, and she is soon facing off against the ruler of Fairyland. This is a story that is more place and magic and characters than complex plot. There are a few very mighty things in here that just endear it to me so much. It is dense and very flowery writing. There is a lot of wit built into the story, and I've seen people say that it is too much or it is pretentious, but I think that for me the point is the way that it takes that and uses it to deconstruct fairy tales. Plus it has the best main character. September is absolutely lovable, and even though the story kind of describes her as having a small heart and being like an irascible child, you see those things flipped on their head, and you see September grow up throughout the story and take what are identified as weaknesses by the narrator at the very beginning and just continue to grow those into strengths. I highly recommend it for people who love fairy tales and lush writing. I will say that to balance that, this is more of a grim look at fairy tales, and like the quote that I read at the beginning, it really examines how there is a little bit of grief baked into adventure and the things that September has to lose or sacrifice along the way in order to have this adventure, in order to protect her friends, and then what she left behind also. The story forces her to continue to look back and really realize what she had to give up in order to get here. If any of that sounds appealing to you, go pick it up. I want to do something splendid, something heroic or wonderful that won't be forgotten after I'm dead. I don't know what, but I'm on the watch for it and mean to astonish you all someday. Little Women by Louisa May Allcott. I read this book at some point in middle school or maybe like early high school, just for fun for myself. My memories of having read this are about as vague as if you told me to give a plot synopsis. I guess the plot is a little more clear in my head because I've seen like adaptations of it and stuff. I have general memories and feelings of having loved Jo as a character and being deeply upset by all of the progression of like her story and her love life. I've never reread this story, mainly because my main association is of being upset at the end of the book. I own this particular copy because it came in a set of these like Puffin and Bloom collection, and I love collecting editions of classics. Obviously, like I love them. I think it's more of like a decorative and comfort thing on my shelves versus like the books that I've read and loved. Collections of classics I'm always like weak for. Will I ever reread this? I can't see a future where that is happening immediately. There is a graphic novel adaptation that has come out recently that features like more of a diverse cast. Like maybe I'll revisit it that way, but for the time being I'm happy just having this on my shelf. A man might befriend a wolf, even break a wolf, but no man could truly tame a wolf. This is A Dance of Dragons by George R.R. Martin. 2018 was the year that I read through the published works in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. This year I actually read the short stories, the collected short stories, so I was gonna say all caught up. There are like prequels like even before the collected short stories of like Targaryen history that I am 0% interested in, but you know, I'm relatively caught up. A Dance with Dragons is the last of the currently published novels. My experience with this book was pretty much my experience with the entire series. It has some of my favorite characters of all time, and it also has like way too many words. And not even in like a world building kind of way, in just a way where an editor needed to be able to tell George, no, and he needed to listen. My major gripe with this book in particular was more of the formatting. So in the book previous to this, we kind of cut out half the perspectives, and we focused on a group of perspectives, and then on this, we focus on another group of perspectives, but they kind of happen simultaneously, and so you get the same story almost again, albeit from a different perspective. But this is already so long that I was like salty about having to live through the same timeline again. And then at the very end of this book, it takes perspectives from the previous book and just pins them in on the end, where they either belonged in the previous book or you saved it into the next. There was absolutely no reason to just include that little bit in here. It was so weird. I did not understand the choices at all, and it really soured, and soured is a strong word, but it kind of demoted the experience of this book overall. If you would like to hear all of my in-detailed thoughts about this or any of the books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, there is a podcast episode dedicated to each book. Our very good friend Sam, Democracy Diva, is our guest on all of those, and she's like a super fan of the book, so it's always a good balance of me and Nicole being like, I don't know, that's a lot of useless words, and her being like, guys, listen to the meaning. I'll leave the link to those episodes down in the description so you guys can check them out. Nobody warns you that life continues to be complicated after you've done the right thing, that there is no reward beyond some intangible sense of moral fortitude. Ghosted by Rosie Walsh. This is one of the 2 books that I selected and hadn't read yet. This is a book of the month pick for me from July 2018. This is an adult contemporary story about a woman who spends a week essentially falling in love with a man. They spend all of their time together, things progress very quickly, and after that week they both have like pre-planned things to do. He's going on vacation, she's going back home, that kind of thing, and so they decide to continue with their plans to do that, but then afterwards to try and figure out how to be together, except for that when she is like trying to reach out to him and reconnect with him, he ghosts her. And so she's trying to figure out if there's more to the story, if something happened to him, or if she's really just been ghosted, and if she has really been ghosted, how to deal with that. I was really torn on this experience. I enjoyed the very beginning of the story and how it explored kind of that modern-ish concept of being ghosted and how that would play out, especially in a scenario where you're like, feel like something really special has happened. Like they fell for each other pretty quickly, and they spent like a dedicated week together, which is no time at all, except for if you think about like spending all of that day with somebody. So it did a really good job of being like, this isn't normal, but also her feelings are valid, and she was very much in her feelings about this guy. And so now that that has been ripped away, and people are looking at her strangely anyways, because if you had said like a guy ghosted me and I really loved him but I only met him for a week, that kind of thing. So dealing with her friends being like, girl, please. So all of that was really, really good. At about 65% of the novel, we find out why this guy ghosted the main character, Sarah. I was not thrilled about the reason and or twist. I think it came too early in the story, and so then we had all of this other section of the novel just to explore the why and to, you know, I won't spoil it, but it was just too much at the end. It also felt like kind of heavy-handed. I don't know, I just wasn't a fan of where it went. I was more in the bag for like this idea that this guy ghosted her. It happens, you know, how does she deal with that? How does she move on? But it gave a very clean reason and a very clean solution that I was less a fan of. I ended up giving this 3 stars, which means that I will keep it on my shelves. 3 stars is kind of the cutoff. If I rate something 2 stars, why am I going to keep it for my collection? 3 stars is I liked it. So because I liked it, I will indeed keep this on my shelves, and that's one less unread book on my shelf. You spend a long time waiting for life to start. The past year or two filled with all these firsts, everything new and terrifying and significant. And then it does start, and you realize it isn't what you expected or asked for. The Fever by Megan Abbott. I'm almost certain this was the very first book that I ever received for review. It's always very difficult for me with like books pre-booktube because I've always been more of a critical reader, and by the time that Snark Squad started, doing that project has taught me a lot about critical consumption. But since booktube started, I've only gotten stronger as a critical reader and learn more about my taste, and my tastes have matured and all of that jazz. So once I'm talking about a book that I read like one time 5 years ago, I always hesitate. I don't want to say like I recommend this or anything like that because I'm not sure how I would receive the story these days. This is a YA mystery thriller about like a mysterious illness or outbreak at a high school, and specifically how it affects the main character and her family. In my original review, I talk a lot about why I would see this wouldn't be for people. It does explore the central mystery in a very lyrical and inwardly focused way, and it is a little dark. There is a family dynamic, as I mentioned though, at the heart of this that really tied it together for me, and I remember specifically thinking about how I related a lot to the father, of course, because I'm an adult reading YA. The story also uses the outbreak or the illness to explore the themes of desire and sexuality, and to really look at the dynamics between the teenage friendships here. It was very gripping, and I sat down and I read it all in one sitting. I think I was pretty excited about receiving it for review also, so that helped. But yes, I did finish this very quickly. It is one that I would reread. I don't know when. I don't think I've read anything else by Megan Abbott, and I own a couple more of her books, so I'd be curious to see this and try this again and see how it withstands. It's unfair that people could pretend to be one thing when they were really something else, that they would get you on their side and then do nothing but fail and fail and fail again. People should come with warnings, like cigarette packs. Involvement would kill you over time. Rooms by Lauren Oliver. Speaking of books I've gotten for review, I'm almost certain that I received this at BEA. I've been to one BEA. It is I would go again, especially if friends were going, but it is an event that is extremely not for me. It is definitely not an event that like caters the kind of like community engagement that I enjoy. It is very arc heavy and focused, which was super exciting the first time I went, and I got back with like a suitcase full of books and I promptly read none of them. And over the couple of years now, I think it's been like 3-4 years, I don't know, since I went to BEA, like I've read a few of them. So the whole thing was just deeply not for me. Again, I could be convinced to go, especially by peer pressure and friends, but the whole experience of like paying a lot of money to receive these arcs that I didn't read. Anyway, I have a pretty mixed feelings relationship with Lauren Oliver. I really enjoyed the first book in her dystopian series when I read it years and years ago. Delirium is the name of the book. I read the second book in that series, I think it's called Pandemonium, and I hated it. Like, I hated the end of that book so bad. It was literally like a throw a book across the room kind of experience for me. I never finished that trilogy, but I gave Lauren Oliver another chance with her middle grade book Liesel and Poe, which was beautiful and heartfelt and found me at exactly the right moment. It is a story about grief in a time that I was experiencing grief really heavily, and it just absolutely left an impression on me. This is the next completed thing that I have by her, and it was her first adult book, and this is an adult paranormal story about basically a haunted house. So there is a family, the father has died, and they all come back for the services and to like clean out the house, and the house is haunted. So you see two women who are haunting that place, kind of looking at the family and experiencing the whole death and cleanup with them. I thought that the premise was great. It's like a literal haunting in the background of a story about like a haunted feeling, and how this death has left a hole in this family, and they're left with their memories, and they're left with this idea that the person that they lived with and the person that they're discovering through his left behind possessions and memory and reality, like all of those things don't necessarily match up. And so the way that that creates almost like a haunted experience, and it was written well in terms of like language and construction. However, I felt like I I did not have an emotional in with the story. Like, I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care what happened to them. I didn't feel bad for them. Part of that is because half the characters are awful. The other part is because the unawful half of the characters we don't spend enough time with. There's just too many things happening here, too many points of views, too many backstories. By the time we reach the end of the book, we solve 2 missing person cases, we discover a murder, there's an arson. Like, but I realized then, like, how much was really going on here? It was like all of those things sprinkled with like death and ghost on top, and I just thought it did a little bit too much. Had it pulled it back, had it gave us an emotional end to the story, the premise was really great, but she was maybe doing too much, and it felt like some of it was like being a little jarring, or the characters were being a little awful for the sake of being awful. Like, oh, it's adult now. I think I gave this 2.5 or 3 out of 5 stars, so it's right on the cusp of like getting rid of it. I think that I will. Part of me is kind of like, maybe I'll keep it because it's attached to like a travel and a memory thing, because it is from BEA, but I'm gonna put it on a maybe pile for like the next time that I'm donating books, and then I will reassess how I feel about keeping this one on my shelves. Believing is a type of magic. It can make something true. The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. In the story, the main character's mother commits suicide. The main character is convinced that her mother becomes a bird. She ends up traveling to Taiwan to meet her maternal grandparents for the very first time, and to basically try and find her mother, who has turned into this bird. The long and short of it is that this was beautifully written in places and overwritten in others. I've already said in the same video that I love lush and like meandering writing, but this did a little bit too much of it for my taste. It honestly could have lost about 150 pages and would have been so much better for being tightened in that way. So like with the Fairyland series, which is much shorter, but it also is meandering, but we're heading from place to place, and each place is a little different and introduces new characters or new bits of magic. Here we were repeating a lot of the same action over and over again, so it didn't matter how beautifully it was written if we've read like 3 other scenes very much like it. It was really hard to work through the middle of the story, but at the end of the day, it was good representation. It had some really pretty parts, and so I ended up deciding to keep this. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's like the people who believe they'll be happy if they go and live somewhere else, but who learn it doesn't work that way. Wherever you go, you take yourself with you. The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, adapted by P. Craig Russell. The number that got picked corresponds with volume 2, but this is volume 1 and 2 of the graphic adaptation. I read the Graveyard Book back when I was discovering Neil Gaiman, and I absolutely loved it, so I bought a physical copy and then the graphic books as well. From what I understand, there were multiple artists that worked on different sections of the story, and so whenever that happens, there were some parts that I really enjoyed the art more than others, but it is a nice little way to kind of revisit a story that I enjoyed. Not that it is very long, I don't know. It was nice to read through these, and it's still a story I very much enjoy. Did I need both graphic novels and the other book? Probably not. It is nice to kind of give faces to characters that I really enjoyed, and this continues to be a story that has stayed with me. I think there are 2 types of people. Ones who have a scream inside them and ones who don't. Emma in the Night by Wendy Walker. This was my Book of the Month pick for September 2017. It is a mystery thriller about 2 sisters, Cass and Emma, who go missing. After 3 years, Cass comes back home without Emma, and so the police are asking her tons of questions to try and figure out what happened to her and her sister, and we get it from her point of view. We start listening to her story and slowly piecing together what happened the night that they both went missing. I listened to this on audiobook. The book had been on my shelf for quite a while, but then I saw while I was scrolling through my library through Overdrive that the audiobook was available, so I decided to listen to it to kind of cut down on unread books on my shelf. And then I went and read reviews, and the 2 main complaints were about the narrative voice and the pacing of the story, 2 problems that are almost always improved upon when you're listening to it. So I listened to it quickly, and the narration was done relatively well, so those 2 main problems were problems that I didn't have. I was highly engrossed, and I definitely wanted to know what happened, and every new piece like kept me hooked, so I kept reading to the end. The family at the center of the story is definitely messed up, for lack of a better term. It can be uncomfortable reading about them and about their experience, but of course that's done purposefully. This This is just like a fine thriller. I was very engaged. I wanted to know what happened. I read it very quickly, but it's not something that has particularly stayed with me. It was a mostly positive experience though, so 3 stars. There's a stubbornness about me that can never bear to be frightened at the will of others. My courage always rises at every attempt to intimidate me. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Apparently I own enough copies of these that it's a pretty good chance that any number in any set of numbers chosen there will be a version of Pride and Prejudice. This is the drop caps version, which is the colorful books that are behind me. I always get questions about those. I know that probably people who watch multiple of my videos have heard me mention them, but they are from Penguin, and basically it's one book for every letter of the alphabet, and they all have these really beautiful covers that have like the typography on them. So A for Austen, and this is a copy of Pride and Prejudice. And then on the back you have a quote from the book. They've got these beautiful sprayed edges, so it's just a really wonderful collection that I fell in love with. Again, collecting classics in different versions, it's like my weakness. I've now read all of Jane Austen's complete published works, and I found that I love Persuasion more and more like as the years go on. Emma was really great. It took me a while to warm up to Emma, but I've now read it twice and I really enjoyed it. And so I can find like things to love in each of her works, but I think that like while Emma is probably the wittiest and like Austen at the narration, like that's the funniest and just wittiest narration, I think that Pride and Prejudice is probably the best combination of everything. I love this love story best of all. This still has like comedy and humor. It still has wit, and it still has that exploration of like the time period and what women like their role in society. So this is like the best of all the worlds to me, and it also is the one that I've been reading for the longest. At this point it just becomes harder and harder to talk about it in any sort of way that isn't just like a gush of feelings, because I've been reading this for more than half my life. You know that thing where like as reviewers we're like anybody can like whatever they want, everybody's entitled to their opinion, which is all true, except for sometimes like the voice in your brain is like, but my butt is often like, but you don't like Pride and Prejudice? I don't know, you're wrong. Like whatever you like, but you're wrong. And so that's it. Out of the 10 books I had read 8. I read the 2 missing books, Ghosted and Rooms, and I will keep Ghosted for sure. Rooms is kind of on a maybe pile, but for the purpose of like wrapping up this video, we'll say that I'm 10 for 10. I'm gonna keep all 10 of them, and they've now been read. I'm gonna go on Twitter pretty soon here and ask for another 10 number combinations so I can pull those out and start seeing what is gonna be added to my TBR next. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. So stupid. Every time I try to do it, who invented this?